article in the Home and Garden section of the Times Standard the other day. Now you have to weigh this against my telling you last week that I don't know much about plants. Anyway, it was taken from the Washington Post, and some of you may have seen it. Biologists from the University of Missouri were working with plants to test their responses to predators. It seems that plants have reactions to predators that are similar to human immune responses. Did any of you read that? It's very interesting. According to the article, although a mustard plant might not respond the first time it encounters a hungry caterpillar, the next time it will boost the concentration of defense chemicals in the system that turns its once delicious leaves into an unsavory toxic meal. Scientists call this process priming, and in this study, they found that it could be triggered by sound alone. One group of plants in the study was left to grow in silence, and the other was exposed to the sound of a single leaf vibrating with the sound of a caterpillar chewing. And later, when both groups were faced with a real caterpillar, the plants exposed to the sound of the chewing caterpillar produced a greater amount of insecticide-like chemicals than the plant group that had grown in silence. Seems that mustard seeds have the potential to do much more than just grow. They can learn and adapt also. Jesus' parable of the mustard seed is based on readings in the books of Ezekiel and Daniel that speak of a tree, possibly a cedar, that becomes tall and grows abundant fruit, and the birds nest in its branches. It's also known often as the tree of life. In contrast, the mustard seed produces a small to medium-sized bush. And people knew when they heard Jesus telling the story, comparing the kingdom of heaven to a mustard tree, that he was exaggerating. Professor Richard Purvo comments, the comparison people expect is to the tree of life, a mighty growth with roots in the underworld and branches touching heaven. The tug toward this understanding has affected the parable, but a mustard bush remains a mustard bush. The kingdom may not look like much. If God's reign is comparable to something like this, it could result in a Messiah who gets killed. It also embraces a God who delights in popping up during non-majestic events. Here's the thing. A mustard bush may remain a mustard bush, but in God's amazing creation, even a mustard bush knows how to discern the difference between the noises of a predator and the non-threatening sounds of the wind blowing or insects' mating calls. In other words, there's much about God's kingdom as it takes root and grows in the world that may seem unremarkable, but in fact, as we understand it more deeply, may leave us shaking our heads at its complexity. One of the elements of that kingdom involves discernment, as the parables tell us today. Discerning God's hidden majesty in non-majestic events. A man who stumbles upon treasure hidden in a field, who wasn't seeking it, but discerns its value anyway. He reburies it and sells all his possessions so that he might make it his own. And the merchant, who's become a discerning expert on fine pearls, who has been seeking a perfect pearl, found one that was more valuable than everything he had, and sold all that he had to buy that pearl. Or there's the woman who added yeast to flour until she had discerned that all of it was leavened, all of it contaminated in a sense. And again, this parable is an exaggeration. 3 measures of flour is about 60 pounds, much more than would be needed to feed a family before it went rancid or became infested. And finally, many of Jesus' disciples were fishermen. They would have been used to keeping the fish that were kosher fish with fins and scales, and discarding those that weren't. So good and bad, in a sense, aren't random judgments, but words that apply to what fish could be eaten and which could not, according to the laws of kosher. The question would have been, which of these fish have value as food and which don't? It can be hard to discern the kingdom of heaven in our day-to-day lives, but these parables provide some clues. If the kingdom of heaven may not look like much, that's really good news to most of us as individuals, because we live mostly unremarkable lives. We eat and sleep, put our pants on one leg at a time. Most of us won't become president, or a movie star, or even bishop. I would be willing to bet that most of us will not go into space in our lifetime. You can disagree with me, yes. And yet we stumble upon people and situations that call us to participate in God's seemingly unremarkable, though extravagantly growing mission in the world, to give everything we have. I recently read online about an Australian man named Don Ritchie, who had lived at the edge of a steep cliff for 50 years. He died 2 years ago, but during those 50 years, he estimated that he saved the lives of at least 160 people. Some say it's more like 400, who came to the cliff over time, pondering suicide. He would simply smile, say, "Is there something that I could do to help you?" and invite them to come to his house for tea or breakfast. He was known to many people as the Angel of the Gap, and in 2006 he received the Medal of the Order of Australia for his rescues. Don Ritchie was a mostly unremarkable man who found himself in the position of being able to make a difference in people's lives. He saved many, not all, and many later came back to thank him. But most of us won't have the striking opportunity to help as many people as someone like Don Ritchie did. Our experience is more likely to be just learning to discern which things matter and which things don't, and loving God's people and participating in the mission of the kingdom of heaven. There's a cartoon in the David Wilkie book, Coffee with Jesus. Now, you know I'm going to quote that every once in a while. I love this one. It's called Things That Don't Matter, and I'll share it with you. Anne is dressed in her string of pearls and her pearl earrings. She's having coffee with Jesus, and she says, "Remember that woman at work, the one that I can't stand? We went to lunch yesterday. Funny, we actually have a lot in common." And Jesus responds, "Funny, yes. And I liked how you didn't react visibly to her less than refined table manners. I know how that bugs you." Anne says, "OMG, that took everything in me. It was making me crazy." And Jesus concludes, "Keep this up, Anne, and you're going to be able to see past all kinds of things that don't matter." It's our calling to discern and participate in the kingdom of heaven, starting here and now, like Don Ritchie, yet with our own individual flavor. But it's also our calling to discern which things don't matter, which times we should bite our tongue rather than speak, which times a simple, "Is there something I could do to help you?" will make someone's day or save someone's life. I'll close with a blessing from Samburu, Kenya, that I found in Archbishop Desmond Tutu's African prayer book. I'd like you to think about the ordinary, mysterious mustard plant as you hear these words. May God free you. May God guard you night and day. May God set you in your right place. And may you spread out like the grass of a prairie. Spread out like palm leaves. Continue your walk, and may life be with you. May God place you where God's stars are placed at dawn and at night. Spread out like water in a lake. Be numerous like the feet of a millipede.